What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Saturday, January 28th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, welcome back. So let's take a look at this 9-game NBA slate tonight. I'll have the final look of the NFL playoffs video Sunday morning. So please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss our new content. Okay, so at the point guard position, I like Damian Lillard from the Portland Trailblazers playing the Toronto Raptors, who have a good defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing point guards. Damian Lillard has averaged 49.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 33% usage rate. He's projected at 47.7 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 52 fantasy points or more in this one, get you 5 times value or more. He's 10,500 DraftKings salary, 100 less on FanDuel, and Damian Lillard has scored 89, 62, and 49 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 39, 30, and 39 minutes. Now, Damian Lillard has scored 55, 47, 44, and 39 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Raptors. But the reason I like this pick, because Damian Lillard has been on fire. He hasn't scored under 49 fantasy points in the last 5 games, and the next lowest score out of those last 5 games is a 57, then a 62, a 62, and an 89. So Damian Lillard is on fire. Now, normally I don't like to play these players after they put up a monster game like an 89 fantasy point game, because more often than not, it's a letdown. But he's been hot the last 5 games, so I think he's worth taking a chance on here as a stud. I wouldn't go all in on him though. Again, after they score 89 fantasy points, oftentimes the next game is a letdown, so just be careful of that. But I like Damian Lillard here versus the Toronto Raptors. So I also like CJ McCollum from the New Orleans Pelicans playing the Washington Wizards, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing point guards. CJ McCollum has averaged 39 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 35 minutes per game with a 27% usage rate. He's projected at 36.3 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 40 fantasy points or more and get you 5 times value or more. He's 8,200 DraftKings salary, same price on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 230.5 points scored in this game. CJ McCollum has scored 52, 28, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 34, 35, and 37 minutes. So he's been playing monster minutes. He had a monster game last game, and his season average has been pretty good here. If he can score 40 fantasy points here at 8,200, that's pretty decent score. He's not my favorite play on the slate by any means, but I like that he's playing 34 to 37 minutes the last 3 games, so plenty of minutes, and we know he has 50 plus fantasy point upside. So I like CJ McCollum, who scored 49 fantasy points in his last game versus the Wizards, here versus the Washington Wizards. Now, if Fred VanVleet wasn't on a back-to-back, I would say he'd be a great play. He could still be a good play. Let's just take a look at his scoring log and see how many minutes he plays on back-to-backs. Okay, so here's a back-to-back. He did skip a game, but maybe there was an injury there. Okay, yeah, so the 16th, the 17th, he played the Knicks 44 minutes. Then he played in the Bucks for 37 minutes. See if we can get another back-to-back sample here. He played the Warriors 34 minutes and then the 76ers 41 minutes. So I think the risk here is that he played 40 minutes last game. So maybe he's only going to play 35 minutes this game. I don't think he'll get back-to-back 40-plus minute games, but you never know how the game's going to go. But he does seem like his salary is low enough that only $8,100 here, $8,100 DraftKings salary. He's averaging 39.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 37 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. And he scored 54, 42, and 41 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 40, 37, and 33 minutes. Pretty good track record here versus the Trailblazers. Scored 34, 50, 40, 41 fantasy points in his last 4 games. And in his last 4 games in general, he hasn't scored under 41. So I like Fred VanVleet here versus the Portland Trailblazers. But out of all these guys, I think my favorite point guard on the slate so far is Chris Paul from the Phoenix Suns, playing the San Antonio Spurs, who have the worst defense overall, give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Chris Paul has averaged 35.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 19% usage rate. He's projected at 35.3 fantasy points here tonight. I think he can score 40 fantasy points or more in this one. He's $7,900 DraftKings salary, $200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 232 points scored in this game. And Chris Paul has scored 49, 39, and 55 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 38, 27, and 38 minutes. And he's got good success here versus the Spurs. Scored 64, 46, and 45 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Spurs. So I like Chris Paul here versus the San Antonio Spurs. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. So again, not my favorite play on the slate, but I do think he has some big upside here versus the Lakers. So take a look at Jaylen Brown from the Boston Celtics, playing the LA Lakers, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Jaylen Brown has averaged 43.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 32% usage rate. He's projected at 40.2 fantasy points here tonight. I think he can score closer to his season average, get 45 fantasy points here tonight, get you 5 times value or more. He's he's $9,200 DraftKings salary, $800 less on FanDuel. So I love that FanDuel price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 237 points scored in this game. Okay, guys, it's time to announce the winner of our $25 weekly PayPal giveaway. And the winner is Mark Scroggins. Mark Scroggins, congratulations. You are the winner of this week's $25 PayPal giveaway. Please reply to our comment to collect your prize. Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching. If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal, all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won. And then we'll send you $25 PayPal. So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you. And Jaylen Brown has scored 37 and 39 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 41 and 36 minutes. But I like this pick because Jaylen Brown has scored 58, 56, and 38 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Lakers. So I like Jaylen Brown here versus the LA Lakers. Another shooting guard that I like is Anthony Simmons from the Portland Trailblazers playing the Toronto Raptors, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing shooting guards, but Anthony Simmons has scored 33.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 26% usage rate. He's projected at 34 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.4 times value. He's 6,300 DraftKings salary, 100 more on FanDuel. And Anthony Simmons has scored 36, 33, and 36 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 38, 27, and 38 minutes. So I like Anthony Simmons here versus the Toronto Raptors. Now, Malcolm Brogdon looks like a decent play here. He scored 27 fantasy points in 34 minutes last game. Remember, with Marcus Smart out, Malcolm Brogdon will get some extra minutes. He's 6,100 DraftKings salary, so I wish he was still in the 5K range, but he could get it done. Not my favorite play on the slate, but he's looking like he might be able to hit value. Now, take a look at Alec Burks from the Detroit Pistons playing the Houston Rockets. He scored 36 fantasy points in 30 minutes last game. I don't know if that was just an outlier or what. I mean, he's averaging 22.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 22 minutes per game, projected at 21.5 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value, but he's relatively low salary here, and he's got a good matchup. And he scored 22 and 44, 17 and 36 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Rockets. So I think he could be an interesting sleeper pick here. It's a good matchup, fast-paced game, coming off of a good game. Maybe they'll give him some extra minutes. So I like Alec Burks here versus the Houston Rockets. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. I like DeMar DeRozan from the Chicago Bulls playing the Orlando Magic, who have the 10th worst defense overall, give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. DeMar DeRozan has averaged 42.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 29% usage rate. He's projected at 40 fantasy points here tonight. I think he can score 45 fantasy points or more. He's 8,900 DraftKings salary, same price on FanDuel. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 231.5 points scored in this game. DeMar DeRozan has scored 40, 45, and 42 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 35, 39, and 37 minutes. So I like DeMar DeRozan here versus the Orlando Magic. Okay, now here's an interesting value play. Take a look at Saddiq Bey from the Detroit Pistons playing the Houston Rockets, who have the 4th worst defense overall, give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Saddiq Bey has averaged 25.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. He's projected at 26.1 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 30 fantasy points or more. And he's 5,700 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel. And Saddiq Bey has scored 43, 30, and 37 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 31, 28, and 28 minutes. So he's been on a hot streak. And he's got a good matchup. He's got pretty good upside here, playing an average of 30 minutes a game. So I like Saddiq Bey here versus the Houston Rockets. Now I also like Cameron Johnson from the Phoenix Suns playing the San Antonio Spurs, who have the worst defense overall, give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Cameron Johnson has averaged 26.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 25 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. Now, he's only projected at 20.5 fantasy points here tonight, but I think that's a super low projection, considering he scored 37, 35, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games. I think he can score 28 fantasy points in this game, get you 5 times value or more. Actually, I think he can score 30 fantasy points in this game, get you 5 times value or more. He's $5,500 DraftKings salary, 500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 232 points scored in this game, and Cameron Johnson has scored 37, 35, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 17, and 29 minutes. So I like Cameron Johnson here versus the San Antonio Spurs. Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I like Keegan Murray from the Sacramento Kings playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, give up the second most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Keegan Murray has averaged 22.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 16% usage rate. He's projected at 22.6 fantasy points here tonight. I think he can score 26 fantasy points or more, get you 5 times value or more. He's $5,100 DraftKings salary, 500 more on FanDuel. Keegan Murray has scored 28, 35, and 23 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 33, 33, and 41 minutes. So I like that he's playing 33 to 41 minutes the last 3 games in a good matchup. So I like Keegan Murray here versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Okay, let's jump back to the small forward position real quick. I missed a player here. I like Paul George from the LA Clippers playing the Atlanta Hawks, who have the 6th worst defense overall. They give up the most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Paul George has averaged 42.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game with a 30% usage rate. He's projected at 42.6 fantasy points here tonight. That's just about 5 times value. He's $8,700 DraftKings salary, 100 less on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 233.5 points scored in this game. And Paul George has scored 61, 48, and 35 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 35, 36, and 34 minutes. Probably one of my favorite studs on the slate, just like he was a couple games ago or the last game when he put up 61 fantasy points. I think he's still underpriced here at only $8,700 DraftKings salary, especially when he's got such a good matchup versus the Hawks. So I like Paul George here versus the Atlanta Hawks. Okay, now moving on to the center position. Let's see who we got here. I like Clint Capella from the Atlanta Hawks playing the LA Clippers, who have a good defense overall, but they give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Clint Capella has averaged 31.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 27 minutes per game. With a 16% usage rate, he's projected at 28.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's $5,900 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 233.5 points scored in this game. Clint Capella has scored 36, 41, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 27, 36, and 23 minutes. And Clint Capella has scored 37, 33, and 45 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Clippers. So I like Clint Capella here versus the LA Clippers. Now this guy just caught my eye here. Take a look at Robert Williams from the Boston Celtics playing the LA Lakers, who have the second worst defense overall, give up the fourth most fantasy points to opposing centers. Robert Williams has averaged 23.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 23 minutes per game. But he's been playing a lot more minutes lately, so I hope that continues. So he's projected at 24.1 fantasy points here tonight. But if he plays over 30 minutes, I think he can score 30 fantasy points or more, get you 5 times value or more. He's $5,500 DraftKings salary, 200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 237 points scored in this game. And Robert Williams has scored 30 and 24 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 36 and 31 minutes. And Robert Williams has scored 23 and 29 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Lakers. But if he's going to play 31 to 36 minutes here tonight in a great matchup, I think he can easily hit value, considering he's averaging 1.05 fantasy points per minute on the season. So I like Robert Williams here versus the LA Lakers. Now, another value play from the Detroit Pistons, take a look at Jalen Duren from the Detroit Pistons playing the Houston Rockets, who have the 4th worst defense overall, middle of the pack defending opposing centers. Jalen Duren has scored 33, 52, and 34 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 27, 31, and 18 minutes. So I think he can score 28 fantasy points or more here and get you 5 times value or more. He's $5,400 DraftKings salary. Now he's $1,100 more on FanDuel. This is a DK play for me. I love that DraftKings price. And Jalen Duren, no record versus the Rockets here, but he's been playing really well lately. His price is still reasonable. He'll get you over 5 times value if he can hit 30 fantasy points or more. Actually, let's see what his value would be if he can get 30 fantasy points here tonight. He would have a value, estimated value of 5.6 times value for only 30 fantasy points. So I think he's got some sneaky upside here. He has played well the past 3 games, so might not be under the radar anymore. But normally it takes a little while for people to catch on to these plays. So I like Jalen Duren here versus the Houston Rockets. If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.